I'm currently the government affairs manager for Vicente Sederberg. Vicente Sederberg is the nation's leading marijuana business law firm. It is based in Denver, Colorado, and that's actually how I first met them. But we're opening up an office out here on the East Coast in DC. So that's what I'm doing now. Up until very recently, though, I was a legislative analyst for the Marijuana Policy Project, the largest nonprofit organization working towards legalizing marijuana. And so I was responsible for over a dozen states, just the policy work for MPP in over a dozen states.
Wow. Awesome. Well, we're honored to have you join us. So thank you so much for taking the time. So tell us, how did you get involved in this industry?
Yeah, well, as you can tell, my involvement on the industry side comes from more of my activist background. I came to the world of marijuana policy reform through really my interest in criminal defense work. When I went to law school, I didn't go to law school thinking, oh, I'm going to be a marijuana lawyer when I get out. But I did know going into law school that I wanted to work with, criminal defendants and people who had been screwed by the system, and nowhere is that more obvious than with marijuana laws. These are laws that are not based on ration logic or science. These are laws, as I'm sure many of your listeners know, that way back historically were based on racist policies. And those policies are perpetuated to this day, where despite people of all races using marijuana at equal rates, African Americans are far more likely to be arrested and criminally charged for, a behavior and activity that really isn't harming anyone else, and that is certainly no more harmful than people who choose to use alcohol instead.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, and I encourage them to fail a lot because I think there's a lot of learning there. So I'm wondering, what's a key mistake or failure that you've learned from in your time in the cannabis world?
I think one big mistake that people make is forgetting that, especially in a state like New York, where the medical cannabis industry is just opening up, and it's opening up very slowly and still very restrictively, the service you're providing is medical. It doesn't matter that all of your friends that use cannabis recreationally. It doesn't matter that on principle anyone should be able to use cannabis without anyone questioning their motive, and again that this is a safer substance than a lot of prescription medication, but also than alcohol or tobacco, other substances that adults use for non-medical purposes. We have to keep in mind that this new industry that we're opening up is medically focused, and so everything you do from quality assurance in your cultivation centers to how you interface with your customers, they're patients, and the product that you're providing is medical first. So it's not a good idea in these early years, especially in a place like New York or very new states that are just opening up. It's not a good idea to revert back to old quote unquote stoner tropes, keep the Rastafari colors out, keep references to street drug names as far away from your product as possible, and keep in mind that how we're gonna win legitimacy and keep this market around is by playing by the rules and remembering that we're here to serve patients first.
Awesome. So along those lines, what advice do you have for aspiring cannabis entrepreneurs, even those outside of New York?
Yeah, I think we actually touched upon this when we first met Michael, so maybe this is something your listeners are already aware of. But the current medical cannabis laws in a lot of different states are now limiting the number of licenses that can be obtained. New York is a perfect example. The licensing process just closed, and only five of the thousands of applicants who submitted an application will actually become licensed in New York. So to keep in mind that the obvious place to go is to become a cultivator. but it's not the easiest. And there are so many collateral services and collateral sectors that are going to benefit and that are going to blow up from the cannabis industry too. So if you're an entrepreneur, I mean, you should be used to this, like thinking outside the box, thinking of what other people haven't done already. Don't just go for the obvious dispensary license, cultivation license. Think about how your existing service can help service what is going to be a brand new expanding industry.
Yeah, beautiful. I love that advice. So, what excites you most about the industry in 2015 and beyond?
Really the fact that we are building a brand new industry from scratch. I mean, again, Michael, like a lot of your contacts probably came up through the tech boom and the dot-com, the dot-com bubble happened within our lifetimes. But like for me, I have never been at the forefront or at the cutting edge of a brand new industry like this. We have a chance to create, not just follow the old models of other industries, but we have the ability to learn and adapt and take the best lessons from similar industries. I mean, one common example that we keep coming back to, there are a lot of people who are worried about children or minors having access to cannabis more than they already do if we legalize, which, first of all, that's like a false argument, and I could go deeper into that. But the other thing is that we've had decades of experience regulating tobacco and alcohol now. We have drastically reduced the number of children who use tobacco products, and so we can take those same lessons without having to go through decades of learning pains and just apply them immediately to cannabis. Mm-hmm. In the same vein, we know that we're in an era right now, across every sector where people of color and women are still struggling to establish themselves and have a place of influence within so many industries. And it's getting better, but we have a chance as a brand new industry to not leave those populations behind and to really make sure that we are an accepting place where people of all backgrounds, all colors, and all genders are welcome and have an equal chance to compete.
Absolutely, and if we set that example and build that industry the right way, then it's going to put a lot of pressure on the established industries that aren't as progressive to have to catch up to the cannabis world, which will be, an exciting time for us if we can get there. On the flip side of that, what are your concerns about the industry and how things are developing?
I think this kind of plays back into other points we've previously made. I am concerned that already a lot of the power and influence is being concentrated in very few hands. Again, New York as an example. Obviously, your local mom and pop shop or your local, maybe underground experienced cultivator who wants to go legit is not going to have the opportunity to go legit because they're not going to get one of the five in all of New York State licenses that are going to go out to become cultivators. And so you're not really removing the incentive for people to continue growing illicitly in this market. People who have been growing, who have been making their living, selling marijuana in New York City are probably going to continue doing so unless you give them a way to enter the market legitimately. And I think it's unfair that, on one side of the law, people who have had, a lot of experience growing this product, making this, for what is a lot of people medicine, now either have criminal records that preclude them from entering the industry legitimately and using all of those skills, training, and experience that they've gained to provide for themselves in a legal manner. They're all precluded from this industry, and even more so, they're not able to be their own employers. Like at best, even if we expand the number of licenses that are available, they're probably still going to go to the people who can afford, lawyers like myself to help them with their applications, and who have teams working with them. So I think I understand the concerns of a lot of policymakers and lawmakers for why we don't want this to expand too quickly and that there are very strict background checks. But as an industry, we need to put our money where our mouth is, and this industry wouldn't exist without the activist side. And for any of your listeners who are entrepreneurs, if they don't consider themselves activists as well, they may as well get out now. Like, we need everyone to be an advocate, because this industry will not exist without the activism.
Absolutely. The two have to go hand in hand. So that was so spot on. I love it. That was great.
Thank you.
So how can people who love cannabis better serve the movement to end prohibition?
I mean, this is a big question. Right? I mean, number one is write to your lawmakers, write to your legislators. It can be as easy as, I like people are always annoyed by like the junk mail that fills up their inboxes. But if you sign up for groups like Americans for Safe Access, sign up for groups like Marijuana Policy Project, they're going to have pre-written emails for you, when something big happens, and that way you don't even need to like keep track of it yourself. You don't need to like be on top of all the news or anything, but just as soon as you see an email from MPP or ASA, that's going to be a big deal. Like, we just need constituents to come out and speak to the legislators and let them know, that a majority of people in New York and a majority of people across the country are in favor of more responsible legal marijuana laws. And we're at a point right now where that's common knowledge, but each legislator can keep coming up with excuses like, oh, not in my district, like not my voters, like I come from a really conservative district. And I hear this even from places where Democrats far outnumber Republicans. You would expect them to be a little more open-minded to this, but they're just very risk adverse and voter conscious. So an easy step is just to fill out one of those pre-written emails and make sure it gets sent. The next step is like actually calling your legislator, or like joining a citizen lobby day and speaking to your state elected officials or congressmen in person. And of course, if that is not quite your jam, then tabling at events, for local cannabis groups, is always helpful to get the message out and the education out. Definitely always keep in mind that what we're doing is educational. You're not here to argue with someone. If someone doesn't agree with you, it's probably because they don't understand and there's something like that's scaring them about the idea of legal marijuana. And that's how I approach all of my lobby meetings, all of the educational events I go to. It's truly just education. The more information we can give people, the more they can weigh for themselves what is the right choice and not feel like they're being attacked. And to stay professional. I shouldn't have to say that, and how you look and how you present yourself shouldn't influence whether you're credible or not, or what. It shouldn't influence the substance of what you're saying. But unfortunately, we're already fighting against these very strong stereotypes about who the typical cannabis user is. So go above and beyond to prove them wrong.
Awesome. Along those lines, obviously I'm totally in agreement with you about education and really maintaining professionalism and holding ourselves in the industry to a high standard. But as far as the education piece, what's something that you wish people outside of cannabis culture who don't have that education, what do you wish they knew about this plant?
Honestly, and it's so hard to get this across, but cannabis is no more harmful a recreational substance than alcohol is. Period. Once people understand that, it's a safer substance both for the individual user and the community than alcohol is. And I'm not demonizing alcohol. I'm not saying you shouldn't use alcohol, but I'm just saying if as a society we accept that adults over 21 can safely and responsibly use alcohol, and that they are allowed to make that choice, whether it's for them or they can make the choice not to if it's not for them, Cannabis should be treated the same way. It's not for everybody. Some people will continue choosing not to use it, and that's completely fine. But for a lot of people, the long-term health effects of using cannabis are less damaging than alcohol. It's not an addictive substance like alcohol and tobacco is. And unlike alcohol, it doesn't lead to, reckless or sometimes aggressive or violent behavior that alcohol does. So cannabis use should be considered exactly the same way that people view use of alcohol.
Awesome. You have time for one bonus question?
Okay.
All right. Well, since you're, a policy person, I'm wondering, what's for you, what's like the most interesting state or policy situation that's coming on board right now, or just fun to watch to see how it develops?
I think a really fun one right now is Alaska. To be honest, it's not on anyone's radar because it's so far away. But they, along with Oregon, just legalized in 2014 as well. But a little known fact is that since the 70s, it's been in their state constitution, basically, that they have a private right to use cannabis in their homes. In their state constitution, like the judges interpreted that. So for a long time now, Alaskans have been accustomed to this very robust black or gray market, even because like adult Alaskans, as long as it's inside their home, could have up to 4 ounces of marijuana, I want to say.
Right.
And so now they're in the process of trying to adapt to a legal marijuana market that in a lot of ways they're facing the same challenges where they don't want it to be completely corporatized and for all of the cultivation and all of the legal licenses to be concentrated in very few hands, and rather provide more entry points to everyone who has been participating in the gray market for so long to become legitimate. But yeah, because their population is spread across such wide land, it doesn't make sense to have like only a couple cultivation centers and for everyone to get it from there, or even a couple of dispensaries. Like everyone is so much more do it yourself in Alaska because they have to be self-reliant. That it'll be interesting to see how the regulators in Alaska figure that out. And also because they have a lot more like federally controlled land, and when this product is transported across waterways or through the air, it's still a legal question that hasn't been resolved whether that's violates federal mandate or not. So that should be interesting to watch.
Awesome. Any last words for our audience?
Just stay involved. Keep your eye on the prize, obviously, but the prize here is to make sure this industry continues existing far after we're gone.